5 cents. That includes signing? No. In favor? I'm ready to move it.
Good afternoon and welcome to the February crop production and WASDE briefing. My name is Joe Parsons. I serve as chair of the Agricultural Statistics Board here at NASS. This briefing is for the Secretary of Agriculture and other policymakers at USDA. We are very pleased to welcome Dr. Seth Meyer, USDA's Chief Economist, as our Secretary Designate today. I'd also like to welcome Dr. Cindy Nickerson, USDA's Deputy Chief Economist. Dr. Meyer, I want to share that we had our Florida State Statistician, Mr. Mark Hudson.
He'll be back.
He'll be back.
All right.
In to help us work on parts of the report. I have a few notes for our live streaming audience. The crop production and WASDE reports are considered principal federal economic indicator reports. The Office of Management Budget provides specific guidance on how these important reports are to be released. WAOB statistical policy instructs that policymaking officials shall refrain from making public comment regarding the content of the reports within 1 hour of their release. We will not be taking questions during this briefing from the public. However, NASS and WAOB board staff are available for email or phone questions, and NASS will host a social media event 1 hour after the release of these data. We strive to have everything presented at this briefing match the official record. However, should there be any discrepancy between what is presented at this briefing and the public estimates, always refer to the published estimates. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Lance Honig, Chief of our NASS Crops Branch, and he will be immediately followed by Dr. Mark Jekanowski, Chair of the World Ag Outlook Board.
All right, thank you, Joe. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Welcome to today's briefing. This is one of our shorter reports, as you probably know. In fact, we kind of affectionately refer to it as our Florida report, because as you'll see as we go through, we're only looking at updates from Florida on all the crops that we have included today. As usual, we'll start things off with just a little bit of a rundown on some of the survey work and other data that we used in preparing today's report. First, from the survey side of things, in Florida, we had our objective measurement or size and drop survey work. You can see just over 1,500 groves were visited between January 9th and 23rd. And then in addition to that, we did have the row count survey. This is essentially a survey that gives us an indication of harvest progress. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. You can see that was done January 24th and 25th. And then last but not least, some what we would call utilization data, in other words, processing data that we get from the Florida Citrus Administrative Committee. It's the marketing order type information there. Obviously very valuable when we get into harvest because that's a great tracking of the production that we've actually seen move through the process there. So with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at the numbers to start things off with citrus. As is normally the case in February, only Florida reporting this month, and you see we've got a couple of changes again this month. So looking at the all, in fact, they're all in the oranges. If we look at all orange production, you can see that total is now 2.613 million tons. That is down 3.3% from last month. We're now down nearly 25% year over year. If you look at the split between the non-Valencias and the Valencias, essentially what it comes down to is we're down 1 million boxes in each of those two categories in Florida. If you look specifically at the non-Valencias, our records go back for the non-Valencia split, go all the way back to the 33-34 season, and that is the lowest non-Valencia total that we see for Florida in that time frame. And then on the Valencia crop, we're actually looking at the smallest crop there since 1939-40, and so that means all oranges in Florida, smallest crop since 1935-36 season. Really the same story that we've been talking about all season, but on the non-Valencia side, row count survey says we're about 92% harvested, so that utilization data really the driver behind the change that you see this month. And then, of course, on the Valencia's harvest just barely getting underway in Florida. So we're still relying on the size and drop information. And the story, again, the same on both crops as we've been talking about, small size, high drop. And of course, the hurricanes having an impact this year as well. As we look at the remaining citrus crops, you see no change from last month for the grapefruit, lemons, or tangerine. Both the grapefruit and lemons, of course, are down fairly sharply from last year. The tangerines up sharply, but most of the tangerines are in California. And so just a completely different story there this year than we see with the oranges and grapefruit in particular. The only other crop that we're forecasting here today at NASS is sugarcane. And once again, only changes to Florida for this crop as well. You can see just a slight adjustment down on the harvested acreage and then a small increase on the yield side. So overall, we're now looking at just over 35 million tons there, up 1% from our previous forecast, 6.6% above last season. Nationally, that is the 5th highest sugarcane production on record. But it's not the same everywhere, right? In Louisiana, we're looking at the highest production on record. But in Texas, we're looking at the lowest production since 1973. Of course, that's the same dry story that we've talked about with many of the other crops as well. So that's actually the last data slide that I have for you today. Here you can see some of the upcoming reports. Later this month, Farms and Land and Farms, February 24th, we'll be releasing our corn, sorghum, and soybean county estimates. That's always highly anticipated, as well as some of the other reports there. You can see the Rice County estimates on March 3rd. And then, of course, we'll be back here on March 8th for the next crop production. Just a few reminders, especially for our viewing audience out there, because I know you're familiar with these things, Seth, but just around the corner is the Outlook Forum. So I want to remind folks, if you haven't registered yet, there is options for both in-person and virtual attendance. So get out there and get registered soon. In addition, speaking of opportunities still out there, if you have not had the opportunity to complete your 2022 Census of Agriculture form, there is still time. You can complete it online or mail that form back in, whatever's easiest for you. But I would strongly encourage folks to get that done soon so that we can get things moving forward there. And then last but not least, in just a little while here this afternoon at 1 o'clock Eastern, I will be on Twitter hosting our monthly stat chat series, answering any questions that folks might have about. So that's all I've got for you. I'm going to turn things over to Mark and we'll take any questions you've got a bit later on.
All right, thank you, Lance. So you left me at least 45 minutes. So let me go ahead and get started. So first, just a couple things to note here. We have a focus on Argentina this month. Also, we're going to talk a little bit about China and cotton production there. Interesting story. And as you saw from Lance, we got no domestic production changes this month. So our focus is primarily on the production side, is primarily international. So let's go ahead and start with wheat. A few things to note. Sorry, lost the slide from my notes, but I can talk through it anyway. A few things to note here. World wheat production, raised Australia crop, maybe not too much of a surprise there. Excellent grain conditions, good growing conditions. That's based on industry data. So that would be the 3rd consecutive record, I believe it's mentioned. So 3rd consecutive record for Australia. And also we raised Russia's production 1 million tons this month. That is based on area data from WASDE, lower abandonment. So didn't touch yield, but it increased area there. And that basically sums up the wheat production changes for this month. In terms of the balance sheet, a few things to note here. Feed use, wheat feed use up. That is mainly higher feed use in Russia, a large crop there. EU, in Canada, trade up as well. That is mainly driven by higher exports out of Russia, EU, Ukraine, Australia. and a bit Brazil as well. On the other hand, Canada exports down 1 million tons this month. Raised Ukraine's exports to 500,000 tons to 13.5 million, and we are also forecasting record exports out of Australia. U.S. balance sheet, pretty small changes, mainly just updating food use based on the NAS flour milling report. Did a little adjustment to seed use too, just based on a closer review of some of the NAS data. So the result is just a small uptick in ending stocks and lowered the season average price 10 cents a bushel. At $9 is still a record, and about 2/3 of the crop market at this point. Moving into rice, fairly small changes here too on the production side of the balance sheet, mainly truing up production estimates based on new data. So Brazil, that is CONABI data. Bangladesh, Thailand, and Vietnam, those are all some updates based on post reports, and Sri Lanka up a bit based on government data. So, but pretty small changes at this time in the season. Rice balance sheet, couple things to note here. Total use up 1.1 million tons. That's mostly China, and also some increase in Bangladesh as well, with the substitution of rice for the high-priced wheat. So some kind of consumer substitution going on there. Trade adjusted lower this month, 300,000 tons, but it should be noted that exports out of India, we raised 1 million tons, so they're still exporting a lot of rice despite the export controls they have in place, and but that's offset by lower exports from Thailand and Vietnam. U.S. rice balance sheet. Again, here this month, in terms of the U.S. balance sheet, the focus is mainly on trade. Made some pretty important adjustments here. Imports lowered 3 million tons, 42 million. That would still be a record import level, even though based on pace, we made import pace, we made this adjustment lower, and that's lower imports of both long grain and medium short. In exports, exports is kind of the same story we've been talking about for a while here. High prices, weak sales base. So reduced exports, 4 million tons, split evenly between 2 million long grain, 2 million medium short. That includes relatively weak sales of rough rice to Mexico as well. So at the current forecast here, 62 million hundredweight, that would be the lowest U.S. rice exports since 1985-86. Prices, on the other hand, still strong. In part explaining our lower export base, but raised our season average price 20 cents a hundredweight, all on long grain, and that $19.40 per hundredweight figure, that would of course be a record. Corn production. So main focus here, Argentina. We'll have a few slides to give you some more details on that. As you know, drought, but pretty sharp production this month. We'll talk through, and then small adjustment in one of the former Soviet Union countries. So world production down 4.6 million tons, down 5 million in Argentina, offset by some increases in Philippines and in Vietnam. But the main story is Argentina, and so just standard slides here, review of where the crops are planted and where we currently are in the production season. So planting season really just wrapping up, just about complete. worth noting, and you're aware of this, but a pretty long planting window for corn in particular. So corn planting just wrapping up, soybean planting also about done. Corn, this worth noting here too. Again, I think this is something you're probably aware of, but worth emphasizing that there has been a consistent trend over many years toward later planted corn in Argentina. So this is just December 1 progress. About 2/3 of the crop now is planted after December 1st. So kind of a recap of the growing season weather to date. You'll recall December, we ended December in very dry conditions, pretty poor, severe drought. But we did get a little bit of rain, and you're aware of this, some timely rainfall late in January after the January lockup. That has certainly helped the crop to some degree, but worth noting, again, we're still cutting the crop for both corn and soybeans. We'll talk about soybeans later. If not for this, for these recent rains, certainly the production cut would have been much steeper. So damage has already been done, but these more recent rains certainly helped nonetheless. It's also been warm, so this again prior to the January lockup, a lot of heat stress, very high temperatures also stressing the crop. Cooled down a little bit since the January lockup, but still temperatures tending to be on the warm side. Noting here too, just want to throw in a few slides. Katie McGackey, FAS, did some crop tour travel after the January lockup. So she was out there, gave a pretty detailed trip report. Lots of pictures of fields in pretty tough shape. This, of course, soybeans, dry conditions stressing the crop. Worth noting too, those soybeans, they can recover. You know, they tend to be pretty resilient. But this field, pretty, you know, classic example of soybeans under stress. Corn, also crop under stress. Worth noting that, you know, she heard lots of reports from farmers planning to cut their crop for silage. So in our production change this month, that, you know, that is also reflected lower area, lower harvested area, as well as lower yields. So so again, so in terms of the balance sheet, the production reduction in Argentina driving most of that lower production this month. The rest of the balance sheet, global balance sheet, beginning stocks up a bit. Just that's all reflecting adjustments in Brazil's back year, truing up back year for Brazil based on some of the demand side of the balance sheet, showing that crop was a bit larger. Feed use down this month, lowered 3.8 million tons. That is mainly Argentina and Brazil feed use down. EU offsetting up a bit there, higher feed use in the EU. Trade up 2.9 million tons this month. That is what we have going on there. Lower exports out of Argentina, not surprising, smaller crop, offset by higher exports from Brazil and Ukraine. So we raised our Ukraine corn export forecast 2 million tons this month, so it's now at 22.5 million. And Brazil was raised 3 million to 50 million tons this month. So a little bit of tightening up there of ending stocks, mainly tighter ending stocks in Ukraine, a little bit of an offset by slightly higher ending stocks in the US, which we'll talk about right now. So US balance sheet, again, no production changes. One use change that's worth noting, reduced corn use for ethanol. That is reflecting the NASS grain crush report through grain crushings through December, and then the EIA weekly ethanol data. So, you know, production just not quite at the level that we had expected it to be. So pulled that back, and with lower ethanol, corn use for ethanol, that is just go straight into ending stocks. No change in any of the rest of the balance sheet, exports or anywhere else. No change in the season average market price either. So moving into soybeans, again with soybeans, global production, it's really all dominated by Argentina. So here we reduced Argentina's production 4.5 million tons. Again, same story like I just told you about from when we were talking about corn. Dry conditions, recent rains helped to some degree. Still cutting the crop, but it could have been worse if not for those more recent rains. Also reduced Ukraine by 500,000 tons based on some Ukraine data on harvested area. Global balance sheet, as we talked about, production down this month 5 million tons. The other variable to kind of focus on here is crush. So crush down 3.4 million tons. Part of that is Argentina, not too surprising there given the lower crop. Also lower crush in China and Pakistan. Pakistan, you know, we don't talk a lot about Pakistan and soybean crush, but just interesting there that they're having some issues. Slower shipments into Pakistan, having some issues with getting import licenses for GE soybeans. So that is showing up in our crush forecast. Otherwise, trade, global soybean trade, Argentina down, again, not surprising there given the smaller crop, offset by higher exports from Paraguay and Brazil. U.S. balance sheet, again, not a lot of changes here, just updating our forecast, updating our crush forecast, lowering it 15 million bushels. That likely reflects some weather-related downtime in December, given the plastic cold air that came across the Midwest in late December, and just based on you know, NAS oilseed crushing pace, adjusting that lower. Raised the season average price 10 cents per bushel, reflecting recent price strength. And ending stocks up, you know, reflecting that lower crush. So moving into cotton, quite a bit of changes, quite a few changes on the cotton production side of the balance sheet this month. I'm going to talk a little bit about China. In almost all these cases, for all of these major producers and in many cases users, we're really looking at arrivals data at this point. So to get a better sense of the size of the crop that was harvested. And in China, basically that arrivals data is coming in a lot, that turnaround coming in a lot quicker than it had been. So suggesting that crop is larger than we expected. Kind of the opposite case with India. And we talked about this in a few of the earlier briefings. Cotton just isn't going up in the arrivals. You know, there's the expectation that crop is large, but it's just not, you know, either the farmers are holding on to it or it doesn't exist. So, but with the arrivals data continuing to be slow, we cut India production again. And in Pakistan, we talked about Pakistan in some of the early briefings too. Obviously, devastating flood there. Previous meetings, we've been cutting Pakistan, but we did raise it a little bit this month, 200,000 bales, again, based on arrivals data, and just suggesting good news for Pakistan. You know, despite the devastating flood, we might have overshot the extent to which their crop was reduced. Still very sharp reduction year over year, down about a third, but we had a small adjustment higher this month. So regarding China, just again, a review of the main production regions in China. Xinjiang accounts for about 90% of the crop, and the rest is grown in the east. And essentially what we're looking at, obviously this crop was harvested months ago, but we're looking at arrivals data and up, through, early in the, post-harvest period, those arrivals were just coming in very slow. And so that kind of, led to some caution. We thought that might reflect a smaller crop. But in recent months, the arrivals really turned around, shot much higher, kind of on par with previous years. The arrivals were delayed. And in many ways, this is consistent with the fact that there were, severe, long-standing COVID lockdowns in Xinjiang. Those were released and or relaxed, and then the arrivals they started processing that cotton. So that's what we think is going on there, and that is it's consistent with the fact that the weather conditions suggested that the crop was going to be very good. This is just a weather index produced by Brian Morris, mainly based on heat, but based on temperature. But you can see where. Oops, sorry. You can see the current year. Current year 2022. Not quite as good as 2020, but very good relative to the average and relative to previous years. So the conditions were good to suggest the crop was large. The arrivals were slow. That's why we were kind of cautious in estimating larger crop back then. Now that the arrivals are coming in strong, we made that adjustment higher. So global cotton balance sheet. Main thing to note here, cut consumption again. This would be the 9th consecutive month of reducing global cotton production, although it's a relatively small cut. And a little bit of a good news is embedded in that, silver lining, if you will. China consumption was actually raised a bit. So so there you go. And then in terms of cotton trade, mainly all of the major importers are down. So Pakistan down. On the one hand, they have a little bit higher production this month, but also lower demand. Also other importing consumers like Vietnam, Bangladesh, showing less demand. So so that's reflected in the reduction in trade this month. U.S. balance sheet, small change here again, but noteworthy, kind of important. Adjusted U.S. mill use lower. That's based on AMS data for cotton program data, and with the lower mill use forecast, that goes directly into ending stocks, raising ending stocks a bit. We didn't change our season average market price this month, as you can see. All right, so moving into sugar. A couple things worth noting here. Overall, small change in sugar production, but worth talking a little bit about the difference, about some offsetting changes in beet and cane sugar production. With beet sugar, we're seeing very strong recovery. Again, industry data, very good recovery. So good sugar yields. So that's reflecting that higher beet production. On the cane side, that is driven primarily by a pretty sharp reduction, 83,000 ton reduction in Louisiana, based on USDA contact with industry folks there, showing lower yields, likely reflecting the late December freeze. So then we do have Florida up a bit, but Texas down as well. So cane production down, beet production up, almost offsetting, but not quite. Imports, TRQ imports up just a bit based on custom data revisions, so no big change there. No change on the export side. Total supply down 10,000 tons, and that goes straight out of ending stocks. Mexico balance sheet, really not much going on here either, virtually no change. Worth noting that next month and probably the following month, we'll start being able to take a closer look at forecasting Mexico's production, but it's a little bit too early to make any changes at this point. Exports up a bit, and that comes direct, just, their balance sheet balances, so that comes out of domestic use. All right, moving into livestock. So beef production up 50 million pounds this month. Higher slaughter pace, weaker weights. So higher slaughter pace, lower weights. So so mainly we're seeing more cattle go through the system, increasing beef production. Pork production reduced a bit, so 40 million pounds based on lower weights, lower carcass weights. Broiler production forecast reduced 200 million. That mainly reflects a couple things, but mainly first quarter hatchery data. So smaller increase in egg sets, and slaughter data as well. So just slower slaughter pace. So combining there for lower broiler production forecast. No change in turkeys. Prices, steer prices up. And you're aware of the strength that's been in that sector lately. Strong packer demand, tight supplies. That $159 per hundredweight, that would be a record, of course, record steer price. Hog prices, though, on the other hand, lowered $1.50 per hundredweight this month, just based on current prices. Seen some weakness there. Broiler prices down. That's mainly in the first half of this year. Just lower prices to date. Turkey prices, on the other hand, increased 2 cents a pound, reflecting again relatively tight supplies there and good demand. Meat trade, almost nothing to talk about here. Not too much going on. Just beef imports up. That largely reflects the higher imports out of South America, particularly Brazil. Turkey exports down a bit, not too surprising there given the tight supplies and higher prices. Let's wrap things up with dairy. Here we reduced dairy production. As you can see, 900,000 pounds. That's mostly a reduction in cow numbers, also a modest reduction in milk per cow as well. But lower cow numbers driven by several factors, including, as you know, the cattle inventory report showing fewer heifers retained, lower heifer retention. Increased dairy cow slaughter as well, tightening up supplies, and just the fact that dairy returns are weakening. So that is, certainly not giving an incentive to expand production. Then in terms of trade, imports and exports, fat-based imports up a bit this month. That's mainly reflecting higher imports of cheese. Exports down. That's both lower on a fat basis, lower cheese, and various fluid and dry products. On a skim basis, on a skim solids basis, imports up. Again, that's cheese there as well. Exports down. That is mainly skim milk products, and that's given very strong international competition. Dairy product prices, well, as you can see, kind of lower across the board. Still strong production as well as strong international competition pressuring those prices. Cheese prices also being weighed down by a pretty large carrying stocks there as well. So product prices down, reflected in lower class prices, class 3, class 4, both reduced quite a bit this month. All milk price reduced 90 cents per hundredweight. That would be down $4.86 year over year. And at these prices, this current forecast, all milk price $20.70. That would suggest dairy margin protection payments are likely to be be kicking in through most of the year. And I will wrap it up there. So happy to answer your questions. All those online, thank you for attending again, and hope that this briefing provided some insight into what went into this month's WASDE, and we will look forward to seeing you back next month.